Several of the country's premiers are expected in Ottawa tomorrow ahead of next week's speech from the throne. The goal to lay out the items they want to see in the federal Liberal government's fall agenda. Speaking on our program yesterday, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe called for a pause on the carbon tax.
This is a cost that Saskatchewan families, given the pandemic, just quite frankly don't need this additional cost as they move forward into this fall. We have one of the most sustainable energy industries in the world. It's one that should be supported. Should be supported in this speech from the throne. Yes, it's an industry in transition, but it's an industry that does not need added costs and unnecessary regulatory environment from our federal government.
Here to respond to what the Premier said on the program is Jonathan Wilkinson. He's the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and he joins us from Vancouver. Hi, Minister Wilkinson. Good to see you, as always.
Nice to see you.
Happy to have you on to respond to what Premier Moe said. He was on the program last night, and I thought one point in particular he made stuck out to me that I wanted to get your response to, because I actually put some of your comments to him as well. He was talking about his wish list for the throne speech, and he indicated in our interview that the Prime Minister's comments that your government would put forward a, quote, ambitious green agenda in the throne speech is code for shutting down the energy industry. Is it?
No, it's certainly not. And if Premier Moe is concerned about that, I'm certainly always happy to talk to him to make sure that he is clear. It is very important that we are thinking both of economic growth and jobs, particularly in the context of coming through and still being in a pandemic that has had significant impacts on a number of different sectors. But of course, we have to be cognizant of the crisis that is looming on the horizon, which is climate change. And so in addressing climate change, we need to be thoughtful. We need to work with all sectors, including the oil and gas sector, to assist them in reducing their greenhouse gas emissions and moving towards what will ultimately be a net zero future.
Is there going to be an acknowledgement, the Premier was wondering, of the sort of plight of the situation that sector finds it in the throne speech, apart from what you described in sort of the goals around climate change and the sector? Will there be more of an acknowledgement of what especially Saskatchewan and Alberta are going through?
Well, again, I'm not going to crystal ball exactly what the wording in the throne speech is going to be, but I think you will find that the government will be cognizant of a few different things. The first is, we're not through this pandemic yet. And with the cases rising in a number of provinces, I mean, we need to be very thoughtful about continuing to address the current crisis. But certainly, we also need to start to look forward in terms of how we get people back to work, how we ensure that the economy moves back towards the levels that it was at pre-COVID. And that means that we're going to have to be thoughtful about all of the sectors, but most particularly some of the sectors that were directly impacted by COVID. If you think about hospitality and tourism and a range of others. The oil and gas sector is dealing with a double whammy. One part of it is COVID. The other is the collapse in prices for oil. And less so for gas, because gas prices have been fairly low for a long time. But certainly in that context, we need to be thoughtful, as you would have seen, with some of the policies we've brought forward during the pandemic, such as money for abandoned wells. There are ways to put people back to work in the oil and gas sector that are also about cleaning up the environment. And I think that's entirely legitimate and a prudent way to think about these things.
Yeah, I'm definitely not asking about a crystal ball. I know that I just tried with the previous minister to see if we could get a crystal ball in the throne speech, and I failed miserably. I guess the genesis of my question is, right or wrong about the stance that those two premiers have taken around these issues. I certainly know from working in Alberta and Saskatchewan that the sentiment that they feel ignored, and you could argue even the election result speaks to that. They feel as though that your government is not necessarily acknowledged to the degree they would like the struggles that they are facing right now. And in fact, in the reason I asked about wording is because in the last throne speech, I remember very specifically, they were upset about a lack of acknowledgement of that or a naming of, for example, Alberta or Saskatchewan. So it's with that framing that I'm asking you whether or not there will be that will be acknowledged in a different way in this throne speech.
Well, certainly I am very cognizant of some of the challenges that are being faced by Alberta and Saskatchewan. As you may or may not know, I grew up in Saskatchewan. I worked for a provincial premier in Saskatchewan. My family still lives in Saskatchewan. So I am very, very cognizant of some of the thoughts and concerns and aspirations that folks on the prairies have. I think that we need to be thoughtful about reaching out and trying to ensure that we are working with them to ensure that their economies are going to be robust and provide good jobs for people there going forward. And part of that is going to be around thinking about how do we partner in areas where we do agree. I mean, certainly, I think we do not agree on the price on pollution. But certainly in areas like carbon capture and sequestration and biofuels production from the agriculture sector and hydrogen and finding ways to decarbonize, I think there's an enormous number of areas where we can work together to ensure that the economies are going to be healthy and robust as we move forward as a country.
I want to ask you about the same subject, but from the other side of the spectrum, because we've spoken to advocates for action on climate change who are worried about the possibility that that ambitious green agenda that the Prime Minister signaled weeks ago will be diluted in this throne speech, that will not be as ambitious as he originally signaled, mostly due to some comments that he's made of late and that other ministers have, which really focus on COVID and the situation that we're facing right now. It's hard not to, obviously, but because of an uptick in cases, does that mean that the green agenda or the green recovery that's put forward by your government will be tempered?
Well, I would say a couple things to that. I mean, the first is people need to be cognizant of what a throne speech is and what a throne speech is not. A throne speech is generally about high-level directions that the government intends to take. It's not a budget. It's not where you make funding commitments. And certainly, I think, secondly, people do expect us to continue to be focused on COVID and on ensuring that Canadians are safe and that they can actually manage their way through this and put food on their table and have a roof over the heads of their families. And so that is entirely appropriate given where we're at. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. That being said, we also need to be speaking to some of the longer term directions. And certainly the commitments around climate change remain very firmly positioned. I mean, we promised to exceed our 2030 targets. We promised to set the country on the pathway to net zero by 2050. We all recognize that, the climate crisis that looms on the horizon, if we do not address it, will make some of the impacts of COVID look somewhat modest. And so we must take action. I believe that this government is firmly committed to taking that action, but we obviously need to do that in a way that is also addressing some of the vulnerabilities we've seen in society as a result of COVID. The unemployment that exists mainly for young people and for women. That's come from this. And we need to be thoughtful about how we're addressing some of those issues as well as addressing the climate issue.
Respectfully, I think that from those advocates who I speak with, when they heard the word ambitious, they thought, okay, now we're going to get some meat on the bone when the government says, when Minister Wilkinson says we have to exceed our 2030 targets. The latest report from Environment Canada shows, even including all of the measures your government has proposed but not yet implemented, we will still only be on track to decrease the emissions by 19% lower than 2005 levels by 2030. I know that many times on this show you have said that you believe that you'll be on track to something different, but there has not been a lot of meat on the bone yet. When they hear ambitious green agenda, they expect more details. Will this throne speech or whatever follows, legislation, whatever it might be, a budget eventually, will it provide that?
Well, I will tell you that you're not going to get a lot of the details in a throne speech, just given the nature of what a throne speech is. But we are 77 megatons short of meeting our climate target. We have identified 225 odd megatons in reductions. We're 77 short from meeting, and we've said we would exceed. I am working very hard on our enhanced climate plan that will provide visibility to Canadians as to how Canada will become very much a world leader by addressing and exceeding the current 2030 targets. And that is certainly something that we are going to be moving forward with.
When?
Well, I will tell you that the major junctures are probably within the next 12 months. The budget is obviously an important thing, but I have said very publicly that I will be bringing a new plan to COP26, which is in the fall of next year. We certainly will be announcing our plan and our target, as well as a number of other elements of our nationally determined contributions that we need to take to that conference. So it will be well before that.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. I appreciate your time as always.
All right. Thank you.
Jonathan Wilkinson is the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. He's in Vancouver. Federal Environment Minister Jonathan Wilkinson there, speaking on this program last hour about the government's plans. In 6 days, the Liberals will deliver their throne speech. Initially, the Prime Minister promised a, quote, ambitious green recovery plan. But with COVID cases rising across the country, the feds appear to have dialed down the green talk. Are climate advocates worried about the change in tone? Marin Smith is the Executive Director of Clean Energy Canada. Dale Bugen is the Vice President of the Canadian Institute for Climate Choices. Hello to both of you. Great pleasure to welcome you to the program. Thanks for making time.
Happy to be here.
Hello.
I know that each of your sorry to interrupt. I know that each of your organizations have made specific policy proposals for the government should they put forward an ambitious green agenda. But before I get to those, I did do an interview with Minister Wilkinson, and I tried to kind of nail him down on a timeline because we have seen a shift in rhetoric around how ambitious that plan is and if it does get delivered in the throne speech. And he said basically that the climate plan would be delivered within the next 12 months. That's the most specific time frame that I could get. Marin, from your perspective, is that soon enough?
Well, we're going to be looking to see some indications about having a clean and competitive recovery here. So investments, dollars going into the economy to help decarbonize our economy when the recovery announcements come, and in the budget in particular. You know, it would be great to see a climate plan before next fall, and I expect we will actually. But it's most important is to see the dollars that are getting put on the table and to see the policies getting put in place in the next near term.
Dale, what about from your perspective? What specifically are you looking for? I mean, both ministers I had on today were keen to say that the throne speech is high level. It's not meant to be very specific. We don't even know for sure if there is going to be a budget. We just know there could be a budget or a fiscal update. What exactly are you looking for? What level of detail or commitment are you expecting from the feds?
Well, I think we're looking for a clear connection between Canada's growth plan and Canada's climate plan. To really prosper in the long term, we can't ignore climate change. We have to actually double down and stiffen our spines as we move forward. That's the way to sustain long-term growth in the country, which is exactly what we're all looking for right now. Okay,
let me follow up with you, Dale. Have you heard anything from the government that signals that is what they will deliver?
I'm hearing the same things that you've heard, Vashi, in your recent interview. I think that they're working on it. I think there's progress being made. I'm looking to see the specifics in the same way that you are.
Marin, let's talk a little bit about what they could announce through the throne speech or the budget that would kind of join the goals of economic recovery with fighting the effects of climate change. What sorts of things specifically might you expect to see, or hope to see, I should say, from the government?
So first, let's talk about this concept of green. So we're not talking about just green for green's sake. It's that green or clean is going to set us up to be more competitive. It's going to set up our economy to be successful in the long term. And it's also what's going to be attracting international capital, creating jobs, and making our products more marketable. So we've been seeing other countries such as Germany, France, the EU, Korea, some of the world's major economies that have been signaling that they will be investing in making their economies cleaner and more competitive. So we don't want to be left behind. So we're going to be looking for this government to be investing in major things like shifting us to zero-emission automobiles, and that includes, retooling our auto sector so that we're producing those low-carbon, zero-emission vehicles here in Canada for us to consume, but also for us to export. A second thing would be around energy retrofits for homes. One of the things that takes money out of people's pockets is their heating bills, and we could make our homes more efficient, our buildings more efficient, and that's going to save money for people. Cleaner energy. We have great clean energy in Canada. Our grid, our electricity is about 80% zero emission already. Let's use that electricity to power more of our industries, our mining sector, our manufacturing, as well as things like our transit and things like that. So let's shift to clean electricity where we can and shift off of some of the other polluting things. So those are some of the key areas. Another area would be in investing in clean technologies, innovations, some of the other clean energy sources like biofuels, hydrogen, which is another up and coming energy source. And we can talk more about hydrogen because it's new on the scene, has some opportunities and could be a new energy export for Canada.
Dale, when it comes to the ways in which the government not only sort of introduces policy to this effect, but communicates it, how important is it for them to, I guess, not try to address the either or proposition, right? And I know that you've done a lot of work on this, the economy and emissions, like how it's difficult in a country that is resource-based to address that quagmire, really. How can they and how should they?
Yeah, we have a new report out today, actually, that tries to tackle exactly that question, and it takes the data really seriously, and it finds that there are really serious connections and really important connections between economic growth and between tackling climate change. Not just that, important connections between improving the well-being of Canadians and addressing climate change. This isn't just about the economy, although I agree with Marin's points there. It's also about making sure that we aren't leaving Canadians behind, that we are addressing the concerns and the issues faced by the most vulnerable Canadians in the face of some big changes that are coming. We're seeing signs of climate change in a really concrete way right now in terms of the smoke in the Western United States. And there's more to come of that. To address those concerns, we have to adapt, we have to reduce our emissions, we have to do it both while also maintaining the prosperity of our economy and the well-being of our people.
What do you think is key, Marin, in the government successfully communicating that? And again, I go back to because I interview so many various politicians from various parts of the country, right? And the interests are, I don't think always have to be at odds, but they certainly appear that way at times, especially when you're talking about the resource sector or various policies the government has already pursued when it comes to climate change. How does the government effectively communicate that it's not an either-or scenario?
Well, I think it's about jobs, actually, Vasi. I think that we see from studies, McKinsey put out a study showing investing in clean energy, clean economy creates twice as many jobs as if you're investing in some of the heavy carbon oil and gas futures. What do people want? I'm a mom. What do I want for my teenagers? I want them to be coming into a job. I want to see this government investing in jobs that are here today, creating jobs today, but also jobs that are going to last, that are going to be here 10, 15, 20 years from now. And so I think that's a key framing for this government. This is investing in an economy that's going to be enduring into the future, not one that's just going to create some quick jobs and then, be a high carbon economy, which is not what the world's moving to. But I think the exciting part is that these are the kind of jobs that people actually want. They're very interested. People want to work in the clean energy sector, the clean tech sector. They want to be part of the solution when you look at the younger generations coming on board. So we'll be also looking to make sure there's training so that we can ensure that, as Dale brought up, we want this to be an equitable and fair recovery, and that this helps build a stronger, fairer, and lower carbon, cleaner economy.
Okay.
For Canada.
I have to leave it there. I'm out of time, unfortunately. But thank you very much to both of you for your time this evening. Thanks to Marin Smith with Clean Energy Canada and Dale Bugen with the Canadian Institute for Climate Choices. Appreciate your time as always.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.